Hey everybody, it's Dr. Sarah Gottfried. Welcome back to the Health Bridge. I am here with my amazing co-host, Dr. Pedram Shojai. Hi, Pedram.
Amazing. I like that upgrade. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you. Welcome back, everybody. We want to talk today about overwhelm. I feel like this is one of those problems that we don't talk about enough. It's something that people suffer with, often privately, less often publicly. And we want to talk about, kind of the East meets West meets best, because that's what brought Pedram and me together. And it's sort of our through line for the Health Bridge show.
Yeah. I mean, we could say we met at an S Factor conference or something, but that just wouldn't be true. I'm just learning about this.
Our listeners are going to think we're drinking.
Not currently, but once in a while. So I'll pull back the kimono on this one a little bit, just because, look, I am T-minus 6 days away from launching our next movie. It's been, lots of money and, 4 years in the making. And, thankfully I have Obama's media manager and, a bunch of really awesome people helping with all this. But there are so many moving parts. And so if I don't stop time, I will get overwhelmed. It doesn't matter if I meditated my whole life and did all this stuff and put that in the bank, right? You can, a billionaire could be broke tomorrow. All you got to do is write, a couple big checks. And so, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. You have to understand when things are coming at you fast that you have to stop and do what you know works to offset that. So I did my Qigong. We had a beautiful full moon last night. I did my Qigong in the yard, and then I sat and meditated under the full moon for a good hour. Came in, and all of a sudden, kind of just had my glow back. And my wife's like, "All right, nice." And I call it drinking from infinity. But unless you stop to do that, overwhelm is so easy in our culture. And we get a lot of emails and Facebook posts and stuff about it. So here we are. We're going to get you guys a whole show on it.
Yeah, this is such a good topic, and I appreciate you opening the kimono. I think the last time I counted, when you have a launch, there's 973 moving parts. I mean, that's how much Pedram is managing right now, and it's kind of a killer. So I want to talk a little bit about what some of the symptoms are of overwhelm, because a lot of people, I think, have that pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Why can't I kind of get this together? And so I want to talk about some of the symptoms that people can have, because overwhelm can be insidious. It's not always waking up in the morning, I've got too much to do, kind of the classic overwhelm. It can show up in other ways. So what are some of the subtle ways it shows up for you, Pedram, or for patients that you see?
Well, you start to lose that resilience, right? So all of a sudden your fuse is shorter. All of a sudden you have less energy available for things that are even considered fun. And it's just like you're strictly business and anything else is just in your way. And that person who's waiting at the crosswalk to cross the street all of a sudden is like an annoyance because they got in the way of your day. I mean, it's a pretty good sign that you're facing overwhelm when you don't make time for humans in public. And so I always have to stop. I mean, I have a term I use called time compression, right? It's if you have 400 things that you've allotted to do today and not enough time to do it, you've compressed time to the place where you're completely overwhelmed. Whereas if you have like 3 or 4 things to do today and none of them are that big, people call you and you're like, yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm chilling, right? You take your time. You have more time. You have that breadth to get into whatever it is without that compressed feeling behind you. So for me, it's just a function of the quality of time and how our consciousness interfaces with that. And I know that sounds really esoteric, but I could turn around lives with that alone.
Yeah, this is a good one. And this is something I would say, Pedram, I want to call you out because you do this so well. Every time I talk to you on the phone, every time I'm texting you, you have this availability to be in the present moment that I think is extraordinary.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to learn more from you. I mean, fortunately, I have you as a work husband on this podcast, and I can keep learning by asking you questions. But I want to flip this a little bit and take this point that you're making of time compression and to talk about something that I just have been thinking so much about in the past few days. I listened to a podcast by Tim Ferriss where he was talking about time wealth
Hmm.
and how, we think of wealth as being monetary. I have to make X amount and then I'll be ready to retire. Or, I want to make this amount on the launch so that I can, make these other things happen in my business. And this idea that wealth comes in many forms and time is one of them is a really interesting pattern interrupt.
I think that that's actually kind of one of the conversations that will transform the way our economy runs. And this is a big thing because really, if you guys, if you think about it, time is all we got, and the lack of time makes us stress and compresses our adrenals. It starts to force us to pull energy out of cells because we couldn't get the blood sugar going fast enough. I mean, we could go down and get into the meta of the biochem of how time compression will actually get your adrenals to go on to kind of double time march. But time is what you lose when you're sick, right? Time is what we all want because what we don't have is that space to just be when we're constantly doing, because we're running after time, and time is money, and we're stuck in this time is money equation. And Tim's a genius at that because he is one of the originals who broke the time is money equation and basically said, what the hell do I care about my retirement or my pension when I'm too old to climb the pyramids? When I finally retired, I want to do that stuff now, so I'm going to set up some sort of income stream with some sort of, and his whole thing is like internet business or however you're going to do it, but to free yourself from money equals time so that you can go back to living life and enjoying it. And so I think he's had a tremendous contribution to this world in that dialogue. And so, hats off to Tim. Great thinking on that.
Great thinking. And, I really want for our listeners to personalize this. Like, what are the ways that you're time starved? You have time scarcity, you have time compression. And how could you, what are 3 things that you could do in the next week that allow you to access time wealth? Another point I want to make is I can sense my overwhelm when I'm not in the present moment. So I want to come back to kind of the now. Can we go Eckhart Tolle for a moment?
Yeah, I like that guy.
Yeah, I like that guy. So he talks about the pain body and how, often the pain body gets activated. Maybe you're perseverating about something that happened in the past, or you're stressed out about something that's happening in the future. I had this big press event yesterday in New York, and I was kind of stressed about it. Like, I didn't feel totally prepared for it. I had to talk about the new book with all of these editors, very Tony, smart editors in New York. And the night before, I couldn't go to sleep. I was on California time, sitting there in my hotel in New York this Wednesday night. And I just was thinking, okay, I'm just going to be myself. I'm just going to connect with the people who come to this event, talk about the book, talk about the story, and I'm just going to be totally authentic. I'm going to take my inner divinity with me, open the channel, and let it show. And I often, like that? So I often I almost need to remind myself on a daily basis about this, about not future tripping, about not perseverating, about the past, and to just really get in the present moment, which I think another way to conceive of it is accessing that inner divinity, not letting your pain body kind of take you down and have you make these decisions that are not so good for you.
I didn't really think we were going to turn this corner on this show, but I'm going to keep going. Yeah, exactly. But I'm in. So a lot of people out there know that I'm a Taoist priest and I studied the Buddhist and Taoist stuff a lot. But what I don't really talk about that often is I've also been a student of Rosicrucian and Kabbalah studies for a very, very long time. And so what does that mean? It means learning to understand that, and you're really good at this when you can step out of it. And it's one of my favorite things about you is, I'll do this. If I'm like, okay, I have, this big meeting and all these people, then they're going to judge me and all this. And I'll just stop and be like, who the hell is Pedram anyways? Who cares? Right? And just get out of the, like, what are they going to think of me mentality and understand that I'm going to get out of the way and just be of service and let divinity work through me and just be a channel for the greater good. And this has nothing to do with me. I'm an agent for divinity working through me. And it takes all that stress out, and it also just makes you better. It allows you to be connected with your higher self and not all that like worry and overwhelm about the myriad things that could go wrong in one of those scenarios. Because even if they did, when you're being in that place, you could just laugh it off and be like, oh, that's really funny. The power went out during my PowerPoint. Ha ha ha. And you roll with it versus getting into a panic and a cold sweat because your identity is being challenged and your personality, your ego is tripping on this. So I think that's a really great point that you bring up, because that's really the essence of all overwhelm, is your ego tripping on its interface with reality and trying to reconcile who it is or who it's trying to be in relation to all the stuff around it, which is way too big. So you start to panic and create a new storyline immediately so that you can survive. And none of that's important at all. And so that's part of the human evolutionary path is transcending the need for the ego to have a definition or a storefront for the world. And the people who let go of that are free.
Oh, this is so good. The ego storefront. I always love to get these amazing sound bites from you. So I thank you. I really appreciate that that draw she just did. And I also, as I'm listening to you, I can sort of hear on one side people who are overwhelmed, who are listening to this, who are hearing us say, okay, new storefront for the ego, do the pattern interrupt, connect to your inner divinity and just let it shine. I can also hear people who are caught in overwhelm say, I don't have the energy for that. What are you talking about? Like sounds good for you, but that doesn't work for me. Like there's a way that the ego argues against this process. There's also a bit of a paradox in it that I think we should talk about, which is the paradox is that this is actually so freeing and so energizing to surrender and to say, I don't need to be the slave to my ego anymore. Like I think and maybe surrender is kind of a tricky term, because I think there's some ways that the Eastern concept of surrender really works a lot better for me than the Western concept of surrender. But I think surrender is an important part of this process.
Yes, and it's a big part of us understanding who's actually driving, because if we insist on driving all the time, who the hell are we in the first place? It's one of my favorite Indian saints is Ramana Maharshi, who's just like, who am I? And then who asked that question? Right? And just keep digging back into the identity, and trying to figure out who I is in the first place, and how we've created so many layers of facades to bolster up this insecurity about who we are in this chaotic universe, instead of just rolling with it and going on the magic carpet ride type of thing and enjoying what this amazing magical universe has to offer. And so Riding life with your foot on the gas and the brakes at the same time is a real good symptom of overwhelm.
That's good. Okay, I want to get practical for a moment, since we have this tendency to get pretty highfalutin. We always go there. I was listening to Louis C.K. on the flight yesterday from New York. Have you listened to Louis C.K.?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So he was talking about the ridiculous, horrendous things we say in the car when we're driving to other people. And you and I did a show on, road rage. So
with your husband.
We got to connect back to it, because, he was talking about how the things the expletives that come out of his mouth when he's driving, he'll say, there I am in my lane and someone in front of me is slightly for like 2 seconds swayed into my lane. And all of a sudden, I'm full of rage, right? And I won't even repeat some of the things he said, but rah, 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 bleep, bleep, bleep. And he's just like, okay, my nervous system had to do this for 2 seconds. And why am I so full of rage? I feel like that's another crucial symptom of overwhelm.
Yes. Yes. Well, and there's two sides to that. I mean, I can tell you as a new dad, that started to boot up more because now all of a sudden I'm like, this freaking idiot who's trying to text message and like not paying attention is endangering the life of my child, right? And you get into this like Papa Bear thing, and yeah, I got to slow myself down and just be like, tap tap, like, hey buddy, you know, you're driving a lethal weapon and you could kill people. Please pay attention, right? Versus, you know, full frontal assault and like airstrikes on everybody, and it is. I mean, that the resilience, the stress resilience, that cushion. So let's go back to a metaphor we drew just recently in another show, which is the skyscraper. You know, the prefrontal cortex being the skyscraper, and so you have to have the concrete down in the ground and the foundation building. Because you know, you could say like, oh my God, you know, Pedram and Sarah must be smoking pot. They're talking about all this weird stuff. But you can't even go there, right? You can't even climb up that skyscraper and be able to be in some of those conversations internally and have control over top-down systems if your adrenals are crazy and you don't have the ATP or energy levels to take care of your basic metabolic needs. If you have food intolerance issues, which is putting your body into crisis mode, your blood sugar management is off. So a lot of the things that you and I have been talking about over, you know, a couple of years now on the show will lead to the overwhelm because the body is just being in panic mode all the time, and you are not allowed up into the penthouse suite of this skyscraper because the foundation is shaky. So, you know, it kind of goes back to all the stuff we've been talking about in the show for a long time. Is you got to clean up the house, you got to take care of the food, you got to build up the energy base so that the higher centers can even fire, so that then when you're about to pull out your Uzi and shoot that veering car, you stop and be like, oh wow, I guess I'm just being stressed out. I should not do that.
So good. I love having these conversations with you, Pedram. You know, the skyscraper, the prefrontal cortex, building that foundation, you know, getting all these pieces in order that we talk about so much. And, you know, it's really the aggregate that I think makes such a difference for people. So I see overwhelm as maybe this divine message, this message that there's something that's not being paid attention to. And I think when you take away the blame, you know, women especially who have these ridiculous expectations on themselves for, you know, being a corporate player during the day and raising 2 children and, you know, being a porn star at night with their husbands, like these ridiculous expectations that we have. When you get really honest about overwhelm and the feedback it's giving you about your life, I think that changes everything.
I like that. And a lot of that has to do with rest and recovery cycles. It's like, okay, I'm going to just go all day and I'll crash tonight. And then I'm going to go all week and I'll just, you know, I'll crash this weekend. Or, you know, when we go to Maui, I'm just going to like, you know, fully recover. And all of this kind of like deferred spending or this deferred payment plan that we have with our reconciliation of self, right, is we always think that tomorrow is going to be a better day and we'll have more energy and vitality to be able to handle today's problems. And we just keep kicking that can forward, where if we were to slow down today and just be like, what am I doing? That's when reality sets in. That's when you can deal with overwhelm, right? Is I can get overwhelmed at any given minute right now. I have 300,000 darts flying at me with moving parts. But, you know, that's when you get shot, right? That's when you got to get into that place where the dude was in the Matrix, where time slowed down and he just started kind of doing this dance and avoiding all the blows, because that is where he's powerful. It's in the stillness that we find the peace, not in the frantic motion. It's like you got to stay in the eye of the hurricane.
Yes. Okay, so for our listeners, here's the challenge I want to end with. I want you to think about, what are the ways that you're kicking the can forward? You know, you're borrowing from tomorrow. What are the ways that you're, I love this last metaphor you just gave. Can you repeat it one more time?
Shit, what did I say?
I've just blanked on what it was.
The Matrix. Oh, Eye of the Hurricane. Okay.
Yeah,
so we'll start there. So yeah, Lorenzo, pay attention. We fucked up.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So yeah, I had this homeopathic doctor say this to me a few years ago. I went in and I had my usual litany of, I'm a mom, I'm so tired, I'm like, burning the candle at both ends. My husband travels all the time, blah, blah, blah. And she was saying, yeah, you're in a hurricane. You're going to be in a hurricane for a long time. It's just going to be that way till your kids go off to college. So find the eye, like find the eye of the hurricane. So what are the ways that you as our listener can find the eye of the hurricane? What does that look like? What does it feel like? How do you find it?
Yeah. Facebook.com/thehealthbridge. We want to know how you guys find it. Share it with the other listeners, and let's stoke a dialogue about this, because the way Pedram finds it is different than the way Sarah finds it, is different than the way a lot of you guys find it, right? And so it doesn't matter so long as you find it. Right? There is no one way up the mountain, and there's so much of this like kind of dogmatic approach to saying my way or the highway amongst all these kind of self-help people, and that's nonsense. You just got to find it the way you're wired to find it, but not finding it is not an option, because the overwhelm ends up pulling you off the superhighway of life, and eventually it will either be a psychological collapse, some sort of disease, something bad, right? Lightning strikes when you stay in overwhelm for too long. And so let us know, you guys. I had fun on this show. We'll see you on the next show, and we'd love to hear from you. We're going to start answering specifically, and for those of you on the Facebook page giving us stuff, we're going to call you guys out and answer you individually, and have a feedback loop. Sarah, next time?
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. It was so fun to be with you to unpack overwhelm and maybe give you a different perspective on it. So thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you listening.
Thanks, guys.